Thank you, lady.
Sweet. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to our developer meetup. We are joined today with actually our VP of product, Kelly Foster. She's going to be giving us an overview of product and what we've been working on. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we really start diving into it. Next week, we will be doing the calls on Tuesday and Thursday in their respective time slots. We're just instead of the Wednesday we'll move to the Thursday. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Kelly so she can start diving into her presentation.
Well, thanks, Nikki. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. Nikki, I'm going to need permission to share my screen, please.
You got it.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, hi, everyone. Again, my name is Kelly Foster. I'm on the product team here at PyroFX, helping to bring Silvermint to the market. And what I'm hoping to do in this time with you this evening is, or daytime, wherever you are the following. I want to talk a little bit about why we're doing this, and really the ways that Silvermint can deliver on the promise of blockchain. Go through some early use cases of Silvermint, things that we are thinking about. Curious also to hear feedback and thoughts related to these use cases or other use cases you might have imagined after you kind of get a better sense of why we're doing what we're doing. Provide you with a roadmap to give you some more clear information about where we are in our development cycle, what that means for you as potential developers on Silvermint, and then talk about some of what we know about what it's going to take to develop on Silvermint. So without any further ado, let's dive in. At a high level, Silvermint really has a vision of bringing a new era of financial and technological empowerment for everybody. And that means blockchain for sure, and that's kind of what we're focused on right now. But it also means other things because we're on a mission to unite people and technology to transcend boundaries that exist in our current financial system so that we can allow people to do things and empower people to do things and take advantage of opportunities that they don't have today. So again, blockchain is part of that solution, but the ecosystem of blockchain is also part of that solution. Advocacy in terms of regulatory policy and things that happen in legal systems, as well as education is also part of that. So the Silvermint Foundation will be, certainly the steward of the Silvermint platform, but will also be working to develop that ecosystem, to develop educational programs, to develop advocacy around technologies that allow people to transcend boundaries that exist in our financial systems today. So let's talk a little bit about what those boundaries specifically are. And they're really in these four areas. One is centralization. We certainly are in a situation today where a lot of money is centralized. A lot of tools are centralized in terms of who controls their use. We're certainly very centralized in our database structures. So when there's a hack, one database gets hacked and it impacts millions of people. That centralization is a real challenge and boundary for us when it comes to doing things and allowing people to be more secure, to have more opportunities. Censorship is another boundary. Censorship means either one, being able to do things with tools that exist today because you are allowed to create an account, or maybe you're prohibited from creating an account, or maybe you have an account and then things change and you get removed or your content gets removed. Again, kind of going back to centralization, when there's a single point of control, censorship is a very easy thing to do. It's a very common thing to do, and it's something that consumers and end users don't have a lot of control over. Another key boundary is scale. Has been difficult for tools and technologies that are censorship resistant, that are decentralized, to scale to a level that allows people to use them in meaningful ways. And I think meaningful is the operative there. Being able to truly make financial transactions, peer-to-peer payments, consumer to business payments at scale. Visa is kind of a metaphor that we talk about a lot. Visa is at scale. It's also highly centralized. It's also it can censor its users. So being able to deliver decentralized technologies that are censorship resistant and are decentralized is a really difficult thing at scale. And then lastly, the boundary of accessibility. And this really means the ability for people to use the tools, in a decentralized system or in a system where those boundaries have been lowered. So today, if you think about it, there's a lot of complexity for people onboarding into the use of crypto, for example. Wallets can be command line only wallets, and that is complex. Even wallet apps that are coming out on mobile devices or as part of browser extensions are certainly complex for some users. I mean, until we get to a place where applications are very easy and low friction for people to utilize, as well as error resistant. It's very easy to make mistakes in sending crypto today, to make payments in crypto. And that's going to be an accessibility problem for the greater adoption of crypto. So when at Silvermint we talk about transcending boundaries, these are the four that we're talking to specifically, especially when we're talking about the Silvermint blockchain protocol. So these are the use cases that we're thinking about primarily right now. Peer-to-peer payments, being able to show at scale on a decentralized system the ability for people to pay one another, for me to pay Nikki and Nikki to pay Jared and Joe to pay Allie, in a meaningful way is a real important use case for blockchain. Nobody has delivered really that. You can certainly make payments on Ethereum, you can make payments on Solana if you're patient and if you're willing to pay high fees. That's not a scalable solution. So that's one of the key use cases for Silvermint, is being able to demonstrate, consumer level peer-to-peer payments. Commercial payments obviously follows right on with that. There are a number of commercial organizations, businesses that would like to take crypto for payment, that would like to issue crypto for payment for services. And they need systems that are reliable for that too, in terms of quick remediation, as well as generally low fees. In-game payments is another key use case. We look at gaming, obviously, for its broad audience, and for an audience that is generally willing to adopt new technologies and new ways of doing things. We also look at it as an audience that is pretty ripe for wanting to have ownership and wanting to have transparency and security in the payments that they're making. Because sometimes when payments go sideways in games, it's hard to mitigate and remediate errors when they happen. On a blockchain, presumably with better transparency, that's an easier thing to do. And then lastly, ticketing. We've seen an uptick in NFTs used for ticketing, and in some ways it's a novelty usage. However, the ticketing industry sees millions and millions of dollars each year in ticketing fraud. And to be able to use a blockchain, again, that one that scales to a consumer level, but also offers transparency and the ability to show proof of ownership, even as a ticket changes hands, is a real boon for an industry that is losing millions of dollars each year related to fraudulent tickets or the way that scalping works. They're also very much interested in keeping closer ties on who purchases the ticket. That's part of their marketing strategy, and that certainly doesn't happen today because you can't see how that ticket changes hands over time. So when we think about taking Silvermint to market in mainnet, which is anticipated, in the next year, these are the key use cases that we're considering because each of these use cases allows us to demonstrate transactions at scale, to demonstrate the ability for censorship resistance, and of course, in a decentralized framework, which are all the boundaries that we're trying to transcend here with the Silvermint network. We are currently working with an organization to do some research on this, to validate that this is the right way to dive into use cases for Silvermint. But this is what we're thinking right now. Places that we would like to develop the Silvermint ecosystem are largely in this space right now. Silvermint as a platform can certainly expand. There are lots of use cases in terms for decentralized networks, as we have seen with Ethereum, as we have seen with Solana. But we really want to focus because, again, our primary objective is to demonstrate, commercial scale for transactions and payments. And so that's why we're going to focus here initially. If our market research pans out, if it doesn't, we're going to pivot hard and pivot fast. But that's kind of why we're thinking these use cases at this point. Silvermint as a network will certainly support DAOs. It will certainly support smart contracts and more complex payments, escrow type payments, things like that. And really, it's hard to imagine in some ways all of the other use cases that are, potential utility for blockchain when you can achieve the scale that Silvermint is expected to achieve. So we certainly don't imagine all of the things, but again, this is the starting place. This is where we're focused because these are the boundaries that we see are most critical when it comes to finance in today's world. So a little bit on our roadmap. We're sitting in Q3 today. Actually, we're sitting in Q4. Here we are. It's really happening. We anticipate launching their Symmetry website. Symmetry is going to be the smart contract language of the Silvermint network. That is what you will use to write your smart contracts. Symmetry as a language, if you've been in developer hours with Eric prior to this, Symmetry is an extension of the Go language. And it brings with it some key security features in terms of its layers that constrain side effects, as well as an implementation of V3 that adds proofs into the code. So we anticipate launching the Symmetry website and then the open sourcing of Symmetry here in Q4, and looking forward to bringing that to developers to have you guys start playing with it and helping us further hone in on what is going to make that a great tool for you when you are developing on the Silvermint network. We also anticipate doing a public demonstration of the scalability and performance capacity of the Silvermint network in a testnet scenario. We're currently running local testnets to see that performance and doing some hardening and feature improvement there, but really looking forward to bringing that to the public so that you can see what we're seeing internally, which is this network can scale and help us transcend those boundaries we mentioned before. The Silvermint Foundation, as I mentioned, is going to be the steward of the Silvermint protocol. It'll be a nonprofit organization, and we anticipate having that incorporated here in Q4. We are working with Empiritas. There's an excellent podcast with Luciano, who is the CEO and founder of Empiritas, who's helping lead this research with us. That podcast launched this week, and it's fascinating. He's just a fascinating person. The team he has at Empiritas is really cool to work with, but they're helping to do some market research in terms of tokenomics and the use case market research that we're looking to do. And we plan to be very public with that and do that publication very late in Q4. And then we are also going to begin fundraising for our second round of funding that will take us hopefully into the mainnet area period. In Q1 of 2023, we look forward to open sourcing the Silvermint node software. That'll give you developers an opportunity to spin up a node, take a look at it, and along with that, we will launch a public testnet so that you'll have something to develop against to see how it runs on that network. And then in 2023 Q4, that's our anticipated date for launching the Silvermint mainnet. So that's a lot, but we're working iteratively towards a mainnet launch and doing all of the things that we need to do. There's a number of pieces that aren't shown in that roadmap, but at a high level, that's what we're working on at the moment. A little bit about then developing for Web3. So the Web3 stack is a little bit different than a Web2 stack. And what we're noticing in our conversations with developers is they're kind of falling into two camps. One is a group of developers that have already played in the Web3 space, meaning that they've typically written some smart contracts and Solidity. Maybe they have worked professionally. There have been a number of organizations that have tried to figure out what Web3 means to them and have created apps and contracts to use, especially in Ethereum and Solana. But most developers have not. Most developers are still very much in that Web2 place, building mobile apps, building web apps. And that stack is a little bit different than what is true for Web3. So the Web3 stack starts kind of at the access point, which is going to be very familiar to Web2 developers. That's that's the UI and kind of the database structures that support that, those web applications. And then, of course, the use case. Well, why are you developing this? Is it for gaming? Is it for peer-to-peer payments? Kind of the world is your oyster in the use case space. But what it is you're trying to achieve. And then under that come the primitives, and these are things that layer ones tend to help support and build, or to partner with other groups to build. And these allow the ability to do the things on that layer one platform. So, for example, if you want to do transactions and payments, you're going to need a primitive that allows you to do that. You'll need tools to help you communicate and to manage identity, to analyze data, and certainly for security. So again, these are tools. In the Web3 space, we learned a lot from Web2. Interoperability is king, and so building out tools that are very interoperable, very accessible to developers, and help create that rich developer environment. And then lastly is that little layer one protocol. It's really nothing in the big stack of things, but it's huge right now because we need to build it. But that's really what this Web3 stack looks like. And so one of the things that we're seeing as we're talking to developers is kind of raising that awareness that the stack is different. There are some things that are very similar and some approaches that are quite different, especially different in terms of being really confident about the security of the code that you're writing, being very confident about the function, how your code functions, and being very, very aware that once you deploy code on a blockchain, it's difficult, and it's certainly very different to fix bugs in once code is deployed to a blockchain than it is when it's just deployed to the internet. So that's a big part of the conversation right now as we look to help bring developers into the Web3 space. It's helping make sure that they understand where there are similarities, where there are differences, and then really listening very hard, because we want to make sure that we can be a part of helping to enrich that onboarding experience, enrich the tools that are available to developers. So for developing on Silvermint, it's not going to be so different than developing on any other blockchain platform. There is a smart contracting language. It is called Symmetry. Symmetry is an extension of Go. Right now, pretty much every Go program is also a Symmetry program. So if you are familiar with Go, you're well on your way. If you're not familiar with Go, we've observed developers adopt it and engage with it very quickly. So it's a little different than Solidity. It's certainly different than Rust. But there is you will need to use Symmetry in order to create and use your smart contracts on the blockchain. We're also, as I mentioned, really listening and talking to a lot of developers so that we can develop the documentation and the tutorials and the examples that developers have come to expect, certainly in blockchain projects, to help them, onboard fairly quickly into a new protocol. As I mentioned earlier, having that public testnet is a way to help support developers to play. We'll have a faucet. You'll be able to get tokens and be able to engage with the blockchain platform that way. We'll also have an observer node so that you can see the outcome of your transactions as you deploy them to the network. And all of those are tools that developers need in order to test and understand the impact of the contracts that they're writing. And then later down the line, again, a big mission of the Silvermint Foundation is to educate and advocate and build an ecosystem for Silvermint, for blockchain technology. And we fully expect to use funds in the foundation to do incubation of projects. It's not clear yet what that exactly will look like. We've talked about project incubators. We've talked about grants. We've talked about collaborations. There are a lot of different ways to go about it, but suffice to say, that's going to be a big part of working and supporting developers build projects that run on Silvermint, is being able to help support them in an incubatory way. And what that really also means is that's getting access to experts and community. That's getting access to funds or environments where they can do their best work. So all of that is kind of building into what it's going to take to develop on Silvermint. We do know that um, it's going to be a process because most developers, again, have not entered into this space. Most computer science programs are not yet really bringing Web3 into their curriculum. So, and this is not unique to Silvermint. This is a scenario that all layer ones face, is, engagement with developers and helping to support their adoption. And at a time when it's a new thing and it's a new way of developing, and we're excited about that because that's a fun thing to do, and it's a really fun thing to talk to developers today to kind of hear what they imagine doing, both on Silvermint or in the Web3 space. So that is my spiel on where we are with the Silvermint product, why we're doing this, the boundaries that we see that we need to surmount in order to bring financial opportunity to a lot of people around the world, the key use cases that we're currently investigating, and some considerations for developers as they consider building on Silvermint or in the Web3 space at large. And I would be happy to hear any questions you might have.
I actually got a text from someone asking what's going to be in the first version of Symmetry.
The first version of Symmetry will have, so it will have layers in it. So layers is a feature of Symmetry that allows you to constrain code to certain layers, and to help manage side effects. And there will be a portion of the layer protocol that will be implemented. It might not be all of what's expected for layers, and I certainly can't speak much deeper than that. We'll have to go back to Eric or Mike to better understand what that very first, but I imagine what the question is when we open source Symmetry in this quarter, what that might look like. And it will be the first iteration of layers. I don't think it'll be the complete functionality of layers. Similarly for the Z3, so Z3 is the protocol that we're using to help bring proofs into Symmetry so that you can prove the correctness of your code. The Z3 implementation will be fairly small in that first release of Symmetry, probably mostly related to proving that there's not a double spend. This is actually an important challenge in transactions. If Alice pays Bob and Alice pays Carol the same amount, you don't want that. You don't want to have a double spend. So being able to prove that your code does not allow for a double spend is really critical in the blockchain space. There are a lot of things that could be proven with Z3. The team met on Monday to kind of dive further into that. We're in the process of trying to prioritize. Like if you think from the use cases I just described, what are the key challenges for developers where a proof would be very beneficial in the smart contract that they wrote, related to payments, related to ticketing, related to microtransactions and games. And it's certainly those features that we want to prioritize for the Z3 proof. At some point, the bigger conversation has been, well, we could certainly prove all of Go. You could implement Z3 to a state that you can verify all of Go, formally verify all of Go. That's a large project, and certainly not one that's coming anytime soon. But suffice to say, we're trying to take an iterative approach to that. We're trying to prioritize things that we know are most critical for developers building on a blockchain. And we'll also look for feedback on that. I'm very open to feedback on features that would be important to prove, or aspects of code that would be important to prove. And we're happy to kind of have that conversation in terms of where that goes on the backlog. I hope that answers the question.
Hey, Kelly, it wouldn't be right. I didn't ask you a question.
Thank you, Jared.
Thanks again for doing these things. It's really awesome that you take your time to do this for, the little community as we grow.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question. I think there's currently about, I don't know, maybe 40 or 50 privacy coins, right? So these are coins that, you know, they kind of like you check a box, pay an extra fee. It routes through some phantom wallets so that ultimately it kind of abstracts out the sender, the receiver from an explorer perspective. Do you guys have any intention to be classified as a privacy coin or enable those types of options? You can always do this stuff without that, but it's an interesting classification that kind of comes with some benefits and some negative benefits too.
Yeah, I'm certainly very familiar. I'm familiar with what you're talking about. We haven't talked about it in terms of roadmap for Silvermint. And I think, you know, if I were to imagine that conversation right now, it's exactly what you just said. It does come with some value and some certain use cases that would be attractive to some users. And it does come with some issues.
If you're looking for regulatory type approval or many stuff, they're going to be like, you know, but you also have, you know, users that, you know, if they're looking for payment systems, they kind of flock to those privacy points. But there's already 40 or 50 of them out there, so it's a double-edged. But I guarantee you, it'll be brought up.
And I think it will be brought up. I worked on another project several years ago, which was exactly about that. You know, trying to figure out how to. I mean, in this particular project, again, they were trying to do commercial payments at scale. They were trying to provide, you know, a stable currency, and wanted to provide that privacy. And man, it would not. They were partnering with banks, and there was no traction there. To allow that element of privacy. And it's a valid thing, and it's certainly a valid concern. And you're right, it can happen third party. You don't have to provide it natively on a chain. It can happen off chain, you know, in other ways, and then come into the network that way. So there's certainly no stopping it. I think the question, and it's a really good one, Jared, I appreciate you bringing it up, is whether or not, you know, providing that service natively would add value, and then kind of where that would fit on the roadmap.
Yeah, I've heard different reasons for doing it, right? There's obviously, you know, the criminal like mastermind lords, you know, I only use this for little hiding there, whatever. But there's also benefits as you move towards a more decentralized currency. You know, you may not want, you know, all your transactions to be visible and tied back to a specific wallet on a blockchain. Because at that point in time, you know, when I was at NVIDIA, we did some very interesting, like, fun projects around visualizing the blockchain from an explorer perspective. And it's really interesting when you think of the blockchain diagrammed out in a three-dimensional space, to start seeing how big wallets are and transactions. And you really start from a visualization perspective, visualizing like what the heck is going on with that wallet. What's going on there. So that might not be something that people want to be known, that if this is the, you know, or if it's, say, for instance, a wallet that would be used for payroll, you know, you could potentially start figuring out things that are happening with companies as transactions are being made out of that wallet, because it's on a public ledger. So there is pros and cons to it, or at least maybe possibly having ways within code that they could, you know, leverage. Potentially think of it as maybe a way where you could have one of the validation nodes or a type of validation node that is staking something that could act as one of those buffers to handle that, right? And then that node could get the transaction fee for that. It was just a thought process of how and why there may be some positive use cases for that functionality.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it from a validator perspective. That's quite an interesting use case.
Well, and you got your light validators that might just be credit debit nodes on the network. So they could stake a little bit less, but then they also could be leveraged as the anonymization node that anonymize payments.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
No, I'm just throwing out some ideas because I'm with you on that front. I get the pro and cons.
Yeah.
So I had a question in regards to, we were talking about Solidity and how Symmetry is based off of Go. For someone who is a novice to intermediate in both of those aspects, and they are interested in Silvermint's platform. what would you say would be more beneficial, or maybe I'm on the right path? I've been doing a little bit of studying and learning of both of those things, Solidity
Mhm.
and Go.
Oh,
Is
cool.
one more important than the other, or how do they? How what would you say a developer should be doing if they want to be prepared for the launch of Silvermint?
Well, be like Joe, number one, which means that there's two important things that you're doing, Joe. One is you are becoming familiar with Go. It sounds like that's new to you, and thinking about that. And as I mentioned before, right now, every Go program is also a Symmetry program. It's like, you can take your understanding of Go, and then you'll use some features of Symmetry, and it should feel fairly native to you, related to the use of Go. But the other part is, I think I like that you're also looking at Solidity and thinking about, because that's a smart contracting language that not only exists today, but it also, there is a network where you can play with it. And there are tutorials and examples that exist already today in that space, that you can take advantage of. And from my perspective, first of all, from my perspective, everybody that's been in the blockchain space and that has contributed to the advancement of decentralized technologies is a partner. We're not competing with Ethereum. We're not competing with Solana. We have all been in this space together for years, and each organization, each project adding something new to the advancement of technology. So I am a full supporter of, let's use the tools that are there. And one of the things that Ethereum has done quite nicely is build out tools for developers. And the things that I would say for, encourage you or others that are thinking about this to focus on is, what are the considerations for developing in Web3, that possibly are different than considerations you've had for projects you've done in the past. So imagining if you are already a developer and maybe have built apps that run on the internet, maybe you've done some, commerce work on the internet as it exists today. Thinking about those examples that Ethereum provides of, what's different? What's different about deploying code in a decentralized environment, especially related to testing, especially related to managing the outcomes of your code, reducing the risks, securing it. Those are really important because your code exists in a very different type of space when it's deployed on the blockchain. Also, nothing is free in blockchain. And I think as developers thinking about transactions, how many of them do you have? How many of them do you need? Where can you economize? How are you managing data? How are you managing storage and identity and all that good stuff? Because it can be expensive, and also making sure that your programs end. You don't want them to run infinitely on a blockchain. So I think, Joe, like what you're doing is spot on. And when you think about what Ethereum has to offer, focusing on what are the aspects of developing for blockchain that might be new to you, or things that you've not played with before, you can certainly go ahead and play with them in the Ethereum space. And then getting comfortable with Go and being ready to help come play with Symmetry when we open source it later this quarter. I think that's a great learning path you're on.
All right, cool. That sounds great.
Yeah.
I did have another question, more of just where you guys kind of see Silvermint going.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I have always been very skeptical of cryptocurrencies as specifically a currency. I think there's a lot of hurdles that need to be made before that's really something we can do.
Yeah.
But I love the other aspects, the other use cases. So something that I was thinking about was like voting across. We've seen even in the U.S. is voting, or if you look outside of the U.S., there's plenty of places that have elections in quotation marks. And I mean, there are some issues with that as well, in terms of privacy. Like in the US, everyone votes and you don't know what they do, and that's important.
Yeah.
So that kind of goes to what Jared was saying with having a private coin as well.
Yeah, no.
So
yeah, I agree.
And also, I mean, it doesn't even need to be that important. It could be something as small as you have a fantasy football league where you want to make league changes, and you have a tyrant of a league manager who won't make those changes, but you could vote on it every season or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of different use cases for something like cryptocurrency. Are there any specific projects anyone at Silvermint has discussed, or anything interesting that you've seen recently?
Yeah, we certainly discussed. I mean, I think the theme of what you're speaking to, Joe, is coordination of effort, right? Whether it's voting or in fantasy football, like it's a group of people coming together to coordinate and make decisions, and then wanting to do so in a way that is either binding or is transparent from a blockchain perspective and verifiable. I mean, personally, I think voting is a great use case for blockchain. Blockchain is transparent. The code is open source. You can see how those contracts work. You can take the contracts that manage elections and you can test them with a third party. Electronic voting today in the US is very locked up. You don't have the opportunity to examine the code in those machines. I personally think a blockchain is a great way to do voting if you're going to do it electronically. It also, I think, has the potential to be very accessible from that standpoint. Governance when you need transparency, governance when you need verifiability. And so voting is one use case. We're talking with a potential partner who's very interested in DAOs, distributed autonomous organizations. But basically, I mean, they're still just organizations that are looking to make decisions using a blockchain, to make governance decisions on a blockchain. So homeowners associations is a use case that we've been talking about. Golf clubs are a use case. Any membership organization, whether it's professional or recreational, or private related to home ownership, all of those types of organizations tend to have governance models that require membership votes. If you've been a part of a homeowners association or certainly a professional association, sometimes you get your little thing in the mail and you can do your little proxy vote. To take those into a digital space, and some organizations today do that. Some organizations use a Google form, and that's how they do that. But there are, again, if transparency is important, if censorship resistance is important, if verifiability is important, again, the blockchain, I think, is a great utility for governance and public coordination efforts. And so I very much see that. It's, as I mentioned earlier, it's probably not an early use case that we're going to pursue because, again, we're trying to show proof of transactions at scale and viability for transacting on a blockchain. That being said, there's nothing stopping other projects from developing on Silvermint for the sake of governance, as you described.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. Joe, have you written a Solidity contract and deployed it?
They have some websites where you can go through some tutorials and understand exactly how it works, and it gives you a fake amount of coins to actually make transactions with. So I've done a little bit of that, but I would say I've been focusing more on learning Go. But yeah, I have done a little bit of Solidity work.
Cool. And how did you find it? Was it what you expected?
I think Solidity, to a certain extent, has been a little bit easier than I expected it to be. It's pretty intuitive, understanding how you will take funds from one wallet and validate it and all of that. It's yeah, definitely easier than I expected to begin with.
Cool. That's good to hear. Has anybody else had experience writing smart contracts at this point?
I don't think anyone in this group is.
Not yet.
Well,
Not
these
yet.
guys are mostly with validator systems
Yep.
engineering backgrounds.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
And that'll be fun. I mean, there's tons of fun things that we can do. In Symmetry, as we start to build tutorials and support for developers to start engaging with Symmetry, being able to write smart contracts. It's fun to do that with games, with tic-tac-toe and poker, so that you can kind of get a sense of what that's like, and also constrain it in a way when possibly the stakes are high in your poker game.
Yeah. And just to kind of add to what Kelly was talking about earlier when Joe was asking about how to get involved with like programming and Go programming, get ready for Symmetry. This isn't necessarily a, a talk for me to say that how to get ready for it, but I know that when we launch that first version of Symmetry, internally, at least for me, I'm going to be trying to gamify and, involve you guys on ways on how to build within the first version of Symmetry. And as it starts to progress forward, we'll do more, not necessarily like hackathons, but like projects that we can collectively come together on and see how we worked through similar situations and problems and start to figure out more or less how we can work together just to better the language itself, because that to us is like market research at its core. So that's definitely something I think Kelly and I specifically will start to think about here within the next month or so.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's fun to do that collectively as a group, and it certainly will help advance our ability to onboard others. So I hope you'll come back and play with us.
Yeah. You guys have any other questions? We'll leave it up for like one more minute. So again, I just kind of want to say again that next week we are going to be doing Tuesday at 15 UTC and then Thursday at 1 UTC. So for those of you in Utah, Mountain Standard Time, that the same thing. So this 7 o'clock meeting will be on Thursday, and then the 9 a.m. one will be on Tuesday. So just to let you guys know, just to experience that. And then I'm also going to post up a few events links within our Discord. So make sure to join us and follow us on there as well. Thank you, Kelly, for showing us the product roadmap and use cases. Thanks everyone for joining and for your questions. So I'll see you guys next week. Alrighty.
Thanks so much, Nikki. Good night, everybody.
Bye.